All right, so thank you so much for joining us late afternoon. I know it's the end of the day. We want to make your time very useful, so hopefully we can get you engaging in some good thinking. So we want to start with introductions in case you don't know either of us. My name is Nadirshah Velasquez. I was a former humanities facilitator at the METSA Academy in Carrollton, Texas. I'm also one of the founding teachers of the Academy, and we're now going on year 7. I, in the past 7-8 weeks or so, have moved up to a district level PBL coaching position. So I'm now working at the district level with middle and high schools. And I'm here with...
I'm Mansoureh Tehrani, and I'm the director of the Academy. And I started the whole planning process with our Academy about 8 years ago in Carrollton, Texas.
So we are here today to share some thinking around our reimagine process as a school. As I said, we are now going into year 7. So we're going to share a little bit of what we've done to reimagine our school. And before we get into details about that, we're going to share a little bit of background information and then simulate an activity that we actually ran with our staff during summer professional development.
So as I mentioned, this is our 7th year of operation. And back in 2006, our district was struggling with the areas of math and sciences, and we were trying to find out how we could help our students to be more successful, not only in standardized testing, but also engaging in upper-level math and science programs in post-secondary. So we looked at various programs, and after lots of research, we became a new tech school. By the 2nd year, our school became a demonstration site for new tech, and that was with the help of a great staff that we started with. And from that group of teachers, there's really just 3 of us that has left from the 6 that we started with. And we are also part of a state program, T-STEM, which is the Texas STEM Initiative. And as a result of that, from the 2nd year of that program, we were also an exemplary school for them. So you set the expectation very high when your school becomes one of those demonstration sites. So you're constantly under a lens to make sure that you are in continuous improvement and reimagining yourself. We are a school within a school program. So we are sitting on a campus of 2,200 students. And we have our own building, which is separate from the comprehensive campus, but we passport kids back and forth between the 2 locations. So there's a lot of thinking that has to go on, not only in master scheduling, but also how we function within that structure, both from a professional standpoint and from an educational standpoint, experiences for our students. 3 years ago, our school as a whole, because of the success of METSA, decided that we wanted to take the comprehensive high school and break it into smaller SLCs. And we now have 4 SLCs, including METSA, on that campus. Each of them have about 550 students, each focusing a specific major or majors of career academies, but each having specialized way of teaching as well. We're the only program on that campus that's PBL New Tech. On the same area, as we were restructuring our program, the district was also looking at the data from PBL campus versus traditional campuses, and seeing the result, decided really we wanted to take that initiative district-wide. So for the past 2 summers, our certified trainers have actually been training other teachers at middle and other high schools in PBL process and supporting them. Hence the requirement to actually create a district level PBL coach so somebody can full-time not only be training, but also supporting that staff throughout. This past summer, really past spring, we knew that we were losing a lot of our staff members, and all because, you know, you're in a new tech school, you're developing leaders by definition. It just lends itself to that. So a lot of our staff members were moving up to other areas in the district, becoming a coach, becoming assistant principal, et cetera, et cetera. So that created a need for our environment. We are a school of 20 facilitators, and when you are losing 7 of them, you're practically replacing half of your staff. So that created a need for us to go back to where we had started 7 years ago. So that's why we engaged in the Reimagine process at the NTAC conference this past summer.
In the midst of all those changes, our lovely director also announces her retirement date. And so she will be leaving us fairly soon, and we are now in the position of also thinking about, in the midst of all the changes that we're having as a staff, what it means for us to transition directorship. And we've been very blessed. I'm fully aware of that because Mansoureh is the founding director of METSA, so she actually has been with us now going on year 7 for quite a long time. And I know that that situation is fairly unique considering that some new tech schools have changed directors almost every year and some with even shorter time frames. So I can't complain in terms of, oh my God, you're retiring, but it is something to definitely think about as we are transitioning new staff in and then really thinking purposefully about what does it mean to sustain ourselves as a new tech school. Despite the changes in administration, despite the changes at a district level that could come at us, despite the changes in leadership, etc., we're really pushed to think about what it means for us to be sustainable on our own. And then that also pushed us to think about very purposefully, how are we creating a distributive leadership structure, right? Where not everything is dependent upon the director or myself as now a PBL coach, but that we empower our teachers to take on their own agency and really think about we are all part of this sustainability process. So in that sense, we went to the Reimagine track at NTAC. And this was purposefully designed for schools that are in sustainability at this point, so 5 years plus. And we spent 2 days with our distributive leadership team. There are 5 of us on that team. And from there, we crafted 2 days of Reimagine training for our entire staff, including our new members, to really think about what our program looks like from the ground up.
So while we were at NTAC, one of the things that we were privileged to see is the new SSR. And I'm not sure how many of you have seen the new SSR. The old SSR that we worked under really focused on fidelity to the model. And with the changes that are happening with the new tech, the new SSR is totally different from that. So we figured we can use that tool not only to train our new staff members and existing staff members on the changes that are happening within new tech, but also use that tool as a learning tool to really focus our PD for the remainder of the year and continually changing our practices.
So in thinking through what this training would look like for our staff, the first conclusion that we drew was, well, most of the staff is new. A good chunk of us are new or have been with the Academy less than 4 years. So, and there are only 3 of us that were actually still part of that founding team, and we've had some transition since. So we came to this full realization that the majority of our staff actually had no idea where we came from or how we started or what it meant to begin a new tech school. And so we really wanted to bring it back to that individualized story of how we even became what we now are. And that started in 3 different phases. We wanted to honor everyone's voice. And so we started with the story of I, and we invited all of our teachers to visually represent their story on a white piece of construction paper, telling us a little bit about how they came into education to begin with, and then how they ended up with us in METSA. And it was a very heartening experience to hear some teachers verbalize very frankly that they were asked to be there or they were told to be there. And to just get that out there from the very beginning, and for them also to hear from my perspective, for example, how exciting it was to come into what essentially was a pile of dirt when I was hired, to crafting a new school and beginning with a new staff, etc. So having that opportunity to share our stories, moving that into the story of us. So the little smaller Post-it notes that you see on the picture there represent the different phases of the school that contribute to that larger story. And then eventually leading us to the story of now, that all of us as a staff are part of that story that we are now writing together. So it led us back to why are we here, right? And for those of us that have just started a new tech school or remember very clearly what that process was like, it took us all the way back to that ideal graduate. So us in year 7 recreated that process again for our staff completely.
So this, what you see in the picture, is our PD room, our lunchroom. This is where the staff hangs out when they're not in the classroom teaching. And so those stories, as they were being told, we actually placed them on a timeline. So from the moment Mensa opened and this question mark is, we're here now, where are we going to go from here as a group, as a staff? How are we going to define our purpose and what you want to be doing? And we also then put through that process some of the things that we've experienced together at METSA. So depending on where you arrived in the timeline, you had little stories to say about things you have experienced together as part of the METSA faculty.
So we took our staff through looking at the new SSR, and we're about to all take a moment to refresh our memories on what that means. And we use the SSR to, you don't have to actually look at all this, but if you're very curious, the presentation is available to you. But we use the SSR initially as a form of gap analysis. We've created our ideal graduate. We have this new SSR that in our observations we identified as very student-centered. And then we've identified where our students actually are. There's some gaps that we need to talk about, that we need to vet out. Let's talk about that for a moment. And what that really pushed us to think about is what exactly is the teacher's role in making the SSR happen. Hence, what we're about to walk you through, because that led us to using the SSR to create a facilitator rubric.
So as we were asking the staff to do this gap analysis between our ideal graduate, what you saw in the previous slide, and then also after they had looked at the SSR, they needed to identify, before we even engage in the SSR, we asked them to think about, as an educator, as a facilitator, what do they see to be obstacles that are keeping us as educators help our students to get there. So that first column that you were seeing on that previous slide was really obstacles that they were facing, and they worked together. Then on the right-hand side, it gave us an opportunity to allow our existing staff to work with the new staff to talk about the structures that we have already in place. So it was like an educational piece, sharing with each other, what do we already have in place that's helping us accomplish what the SSR says?
All right. We're going to move into, so we've caught you up on where we are in the Reimagine training, and now we're in the process of taking a moment to really create that facilitator rubric. So the first thing that we want you to do is spend a very purposeful 7-10 minutes or so, maybe a little less, to refresh your memories on the school success rubric. So there is a link to a PDF in the resources for this session. So I want you to take a moment to pull it up on your computers. Then I just want you to spend a quiet 5 minutes or so reading through the school success rubric, just refamiliarizing yourself with the major categories that the rubric encompasses, the language of the different descriptors, etc. And then we'll move you on to your next step. All right, so in the last couple of minutes that you have as you're processing, I want you to be prepared to share an observation or two of just anything that you notice about the school success rubric. So we want to also honor, perhaps this is your first time to take a look at this document, or perhaps you saw it in passing and now's the time that you've really focused in on looking at it. So just what are some things that you observe? So give you about another minute or two to kind of look through that and then be ready to share out.
It was interesting to watch some of you as you were reading it. You were pointing certain indicators to your neighbor, and because you found that interesting. So who wants to start first, letting us know what you observed that stood out to you in the new SSR? You ready?
This isn't our first time looking at it. We're a year 4 school, but so we saw it at NTAC, but all the language is student-centered as compared to.
Exactly. The language is all student-centered. So we're looking at student outcome as opposed to what the school can do to show fidelity to the model. What else? What else stands out to you?
Index now has a facilitator actually shows us right.
Exactly. So you can see what it means to be highly successful versus getting there, emerging to that area.
The highly successful column asks for in addition to.
Yes.
You have to have successful plus some highly successful.
Good observation, yes.
So the rubric really pushes us to think about what else are we asking students to do, that in addition to, as you shared out, in terms of, okay, our students are successful, that's still not enough for us. What does it mean for them to be highly successful, right? And we really wanted to translate that thinking from the teacher perspective as well, which is what really invited us to do the activity that we're about to simulate with you today.
So we asked the staff to do exactly what you did, share their observation, but the other thing we wanted them to really focus on, we had asked them to create the ideal graduate profile. We asked them then to put those two things side by side and look at, what was our ideal profile for our graduate and what is in the SSR. Were we missing anything? Did we have something in our profile that's not showing here to really, again, get them to be thinking about how do you capitalize on tools that you bring in-house versus what you have developed, yourselves, and be able to promote their own thinking and advancing their own thought process.
Okay, so at this moment, you're going to need the school success rubric available to you, so don't close it out. But I'm going to ask you to go back to the session resource materials, and now you're going to open up a link to the Facilitator rubric Google Doc. So hopefully this works and is streamlined for us a little better than it was in the first session. We'll see how it goes. Let me know if you're able to access and can edit. Then we'll say hallelujah that it all worked correctly. Awesome. Okay, you're going to choose a partner that you're going to work closely with. And then I want you to think about, really quickly, the vertical columns on the empty rubric that's before you on the Google Doc. So we have not yet successful, partially successful, successful, and highly successful. So at your table collaboratively, you're going to choose a partner. That partner is now your team. So I should have 4 teams at each table. You have a few more. So you need to cluster yourselves in 4 teams, right? So if there's 2 teams of 3 or 1 team of 3. So, and what your table is going to make a choice about right now is which vertical column you would like to tackle. I'm going to allow you to make those choices now, right? So I want to work with not yet successful right now or highly successful. So divvy up work, and then I'll bring you back in the next 2 minutes.
So do we have our teams?
Thumbs up if your team has made choices.
Are you all ready? Okay.
Table 2 back here, thumbs up if we've made choices.
Okay.
We're good? Awesome. All right, so now we're going to, since we have 2 tables, so you have a little bit more options than our first session. So we're going to ask you to decide which horizontal row you would like to work with. So it could be under learning outcomes. I think our table wants to work with attributes, right? So, and we'll see, because the point is for both of the tables to have different horizontal rows. So have a quick discussion, see if you can make a choice, and then unfortunately, if you choose the same thing, I'm going to force you to choose something different. Yay.
For your whole table,
your whole
choose
table.
on one row.
One horizontal row that you'd like to work with. Okay, so they've taken skills.
Skills is gone.
You guys are taking attributes.
Attributes.
Done.
Okay,
Awesome.
Perfect.
All right, so we're working with skills. They completely jumped on that right now. And then this table's working with attributes. Great. So using the school success rubric, descriptors, right, kind of refreshing those and using those as a potential framework, what you're going to do is think about the vertical column that you have chosen. So if you're operating under not yet successful, then those are the rubric descriptors that you're writing. If your team is highly successful, then those are the rubric descriptors that you're writing. You are thinking about what are the teacher behaviors, actions, attitudes that are going to impact this school success rubric. And the framing of your rubric descriptors should be or start with the word facilitator. So facilitator should, facilitator does, facilitator will, etc. And then I'm going to limit you to create only 4 descriptors. So we're not creating 12 or 22, 4. Questions on instructions?
So, for example, if you are working on skills, you need to be thinking about what does the facilitator need to do, be able to do, what knowledge he or she needs to have, etc., in order to accommodate what skills he needs to have or she needs to have to really facilitate the mastery of where we want the student to be in that area. Okay.
I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this portion. Go.
All right, skills.
Oh, who's highly
Be
successful on
under
skills?
We need to see some performance indicators from you.
Not to point you out or anything.
I think attributes is the same way. Go down.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, you have about 5 minutes. So if your team has not put down any descriptors, now would be the time to start doing that. Although most of you are there. Okay, so I'm going to give you about a minute to finish writing or typing the current descriptor that you are working with. So do not panic if your team is not quite done. All right. I know I'm about to cut off wonderful conversations, but for the purposes of time, we're going to move us on. If you scroll down in the rubric, you're going to see another section designed for discussion on cultural outcomes. So I'm referring to the Google Doc, excuse me, for those of you that are on the school success rubric. So now what we're going to do is switch hats and then write descriptors for a different row related to cultural outcomes on the rubric. If you are highly successful, you are now moving to not yet successful. That is your hat. If you are currently not yet successful, then you are moving to the right, which puts you at partially successful, etc. Right? So I want you to reframe your thinking and reframe your hat. I know, I did that to you. So reframe your thinking. Questions on what I'm asking you to think about? We're good? Awesome. Okay. So there are 3...
Who is typing already?
I know, some people are like, we haven't even made choices here. What's going on? Okay, so there are 3 rows on the cultural outcomes: engaged, connected, and challenged. So I need you to make a choice again. Who wants what?
First table gets the first dip.
Done.
You guys are connected? Go.
Connected?
Your table can choose between engaged and challenged. Engaged.
Awesome, engaged.
All right.
Okay, so just to reframe our thinking here, we are shooting for another 10 minutes. So again, your language needs to begin with facilitator should, will, etc. You're limited to 4 descriptors. There can be less. I should have clarified that as well. So limited to 4 descriptors at most, and you are now writing descriptors for your new hat, right? So based on our reframing of thinking. Questions on instructions? 10 minutes, go. So just a quick debrief, and then we're going to move on to the hard part. Yeah. So what you've just done is the easy portion of today's exercise. So we ran our staff through a very similar process. We actually had them divided up into different types of teams. For the different exercises, we ran through the entire Reimagined training, but specifically for this one as well. So sometimes we had them put on the grade level hat, and so they would be divided up into grade level teams and work that way. Sometimes it was content specific, so divvy up by your content areas and then tackle that way or put on that hat. So we didn't play too much with grouping today just because we have such a diverse population, but we added another layer of thinking hats and when we actually ran it with our staff. At some point we also divvied up by personalities because we had done a personality test with the so that was really interesting because our descriptors for some of our more compassionate and, introverted people were like this long versus our, very hands-on learners. Their descriptors were like compiled into 2 statements, if possible, with 3 words each. So it was really interesting for the purposes of the next phase of the exercise, which is I have on the Google Doc, if you scroll back up, highlighted similar descriptors. So the ones in red are specifically focused around writing, right? So I now draw your attention because the meaty part of this discussion is now to calibrate across based on what you have created, right? So I'll allude to what this means in a minute. I need you to take a moment to read what's in red. So see what your other teammates came up with. Think about gaps, disagreements, things that you don't like that you would add, maybe some things missing. Is there a way to streamline the language? Right, so take a moment to just read what's there.
Are we on skills or are we on attributes?
We are all the way back up to skills.
Everybody's
looking at the same thing. So this is, at this moment, we're bringing everybody back together.
The way we did it with the staff, though, we finished 1 row. We calibrated together before we moved on to the next row. So we're sort of streamlining that for a 1-hour workshop just to make sure you experience all the different pieces that we did with this staff.
All right, so we are now in revision mode. So I need a reviser. And what I mean by that is per suggestion that somebody makes and that we all come to a consensus to, I need somebody to actually visibly be changing and typing on the Google Docs. So who wants to be my volunteer reviser that happens to also be a nice typer? Thank you. Awesome. So as we're coming to a consensus to any changes, you'll be our live changer there. All right, now I'm going to throw a question out there. What do we think? Any changes? Any proposals? Somebody want to jump in? Yep, and just what's in red. So we're trying to calibrate across, revise, and come up with a final decision on that particular set of descriptors.
And typically when we're writing rubrics, most of us, when we're developing the rubric, what do we focus first at? Which column? Successful. So, and that's what we did when we calibrated. We looked at the successful column, came to a consensus what we wanted to see under successful, and then we either work backwards or forwards based on that. So look at the successful column and see if you see anything that needs to be changed there.
Are we happy with the 2 descriptors for not yet successful? Do we like having them separated that way?
We look at successful for a minute.
Successful, yes.
Go ahead.
It says multiple assessments, or we change that to a variety of multiple assessments, not just 5-paragraph essay, but very persuasive essay, compared to
Exactly.
informational essay.
Very good. Variety of.
Say that one more time.
So provide for a variety of multiple assessments.
Provides for a variety of multiple assessments.
It talks about being knowledgeable, but I can be knowledgeable about something and not expect that from my students. So somewhere in there, and not only is knowledgeable, but has those expectations from our students as well.
Literally communicate. I like demonstrate.
Demonstrate, I like that.
Sounds about and demonstrate. It's not the facilitator that needs to demonstrate. They need to be able to have their students demonstrate. You know what I'm saying? Because ultimately, it's got to be a student outcome. So,
Yeah, me facilitator, I'm helping out
right.
a student outcome. So what's, go ahead.
Might be a successful group of them that created that second sort of sentence and might they're knowledgeable, but then they expect.
The expectation is not there. So how can we word the successful to have both the knowledge and the expectation? How can we reword that?
We just step up the facilitator accepts disorganized writing as acceptable. The facilitator accepts or expects. And
Quality.
yeah.
Okay. So you're saying have a second indicator there. Okay, we can do that.
So a separate indicator, facilitator expects, and then what would we like the rest of that descriptor to say?
Highly proficient writing.
We are in draft mode, so yes, let's take what you have and put it down, right? Because we can always go back and revise and change.
The facilitator provides students with experiences to apply opportunities for highly proficient writing tasks.
I'm going to question that. My wonder is if I can provide opportunities, but is my expectation to receive that?
Well, and if you're going, if you're comparing to not yet successful, that's a facilitator accepts disorganized writing as acceptable. So if you're going to continue that thread across, it needs to be what they're accepting from students.
So how would you word that?
Well, facilitator accepts instead of expects. I mean, if we're,
Does not accept?
well, if they're accepting disorganized writing as not yet successful, what are they accepting as successful? Wouldn't that be the common language?
Yes. So how would you word that?
Facilitator accepts only highly proficient writing? I just,
Wonder what happens.
or accepts only proficient writing if it's successful. Proficient, like,
Okay. So facilitator accepts only proficient writing. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask a logistical question here, I think, just about the process? So at this point, when you all were doing this, are you still bound by one of what you kind of bound us to, which was no more than 4?
Descriptors?
Or during the revision process, because we're starting, and that's great. I mean, we're starting to add things, and I mean, I can see this all of a sudden now ballooning to 7 instead of 4. So, if we add one, are we going to end up taking one away? How does
So we allowed, we had that actually happen. We allowed in one category, they added one. And then by the time they started adding more and say, okay, so remember, eventually you're going to use this tool to really help yourself grow. And how difficult would it be if you just had 10 of these in each row? So let's try to come up with things that are really showstoppers, and those are the ones that you want to focus on, or condense them into one, use a language. And really we relied a lot on our English teachers to help us use the language, and then we agreed on that. But we did it collaboratively because we wanted everybody to buy into this process.
but actually I would say that our math science teachers ended up having more of a voice in terms of why is it that long? I don't understand why we need 3 descriptors to say the same thing. Why can't we just say this? And then, so we let the discussion, it's a very organic discussion. It's meant to be. This is meant to purposefully put your staff in messy work, right? It is designed that way. And we spent, I mean, we had those 2 professional development days allotted to us. We spent 3.5 hours
On this process.
on this.
And then we continued an additional PD after school started. Because we wanted everybody to really agree that this is how we're going to hold ourselves. These are the standards that we agree we're going to practice in.
So it was really an invitation to, at first we would let the discussion go, and then the staff themselves got to a point where they reflected and they were like, well, if we're going to say this, then I suggest we just lump these 2 together and make one. And then, well, if we're going to lump those 2 together, then we need to go back and revise this other section where we have 15 and make that shorter. So they did a lot of that revising themselves. And then when we got to college and career outcomes, the very last section of the rubric, which we actually haven't finished ourselves at this point. We're still in the midst of finishing and wrapping that up ourselves. But once we got there, then we started limiting a little bit per our discussions, because you want to know, that is really a staff-based, you know, I think it's okay to run it how you see fit based on your staff. If you have a majority staff who's going to write paragraphs for descriptors, then you might want to limit them to, you need to come to a consensus of 3 descriptors within this particular row, right? If your staff is already having some trouble just coming up with descriptors in general, then you might want to think about not necessarily reining them in using that lens.
All right. Oops. Trying to find the PowerPoint.
It's on the bottom there.
Oops, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So we're going to stop our work because we're actually near the end of session time. I think we get the gist of kind of where this went. It is meant to be messy work, as I said. It was purposefully designed for us to debate and be purposefully engaged in debate about, you know, what it means to calibrate. So in this particular room where we're asking you to engage with people that are not necessarily part of the staff that you see every day, sometimes it's a little hard to engage in that debate. With our staff, we could not get people to be quiet at some point. We were like, whoa, we need to tailor the discussion and stop it here, and let's just come to a decision about this, people. We can't really take forever on this descriptor, right? So it was one of the first times for us that we really saw a high level of professional debate about what I essentially joked, writing a rubric. So, and I threw that out there and everybody started laughing because I'm like, we're writing a rubric. You guys know that, right? Like, that's what we're doing right now. And they were getting very passionate about what that meant. And the feedback we got from our teachers specifically was that if I have had experience before, this process was a good reflective tool for me to really, you know, get some thinking around what have I been doing, and can I do it better? And then for our first timers, right, so we had several of those this year, their feedback was it was a very useful process to see what others expect of me, and what we expect of ourselves as a staff. So it really gave that framework from the very beginning to our first year PBL teachers. So as we're wrapping up, I want you to take about 3 minutes at your table to discuss the following 2 questions amongst yourselves, and then we're going to get a few people to share out here before we leave you for the afternoon, or you leave us. So how would you improve this process? So think about the context of your own staff. Is there something that you would change, that you would think about doing differently? And then how can you use a facilitator rubric in general, so once the piece is done and vetted out, to collect data to improve instruction and learning on your campus? So I'm going to give you about 2-3 minutes to just have that reflection time at your tables, and then just be ready to share out your thinking. All right, if you can take a moment to wrap up your thinking, let's bring it back to whole group. Okay, so 2 questions. Either how would you improve upon this process, or how could you potentially use a facilitator rubric to collect data to improve instruction and learning on your campus? So any thoughts around either of these 2 questions to kind of wrap us up for the day?
Come on, Cynthia, you're thinking it.
We were just saying that we were debating whether or not you would use student-centered language or facilitator-centered language in this. And our take on it was it would be facilitator-centered, because we would think that the facilitator would want to know what we would be looking for as an outsider to see the eventual student outcomes. So, like, just for an example, when I'm reading, like, facilitator accepts only proficient writing. I'm not so sure that's the way we would word it, because I don't think that is going to lead to that student outcome. Just accepting proficient writing, are they providing the supports necessary in order for differentiated supports necessary for all students to produce high quality.
And I was hearing from that table, they were talking about really eventually you want to ask the facilitator to give you evidence for each of those things. Right. So,
which the evidence I would think you would see the evidence either through your walkthroughs or evidence in the project.
Briefcase. Exactly.
Right, so a discussion about facilitator-centered versus student-centered language. Which do we want to focus on? You want to be very purposeful about that. To clarify to staff how you expect them to approach writing the descriptors, so you can also get some clarity around the rubric that they're actually producing. So any other thoughts?
You talk about having a student-centered language, and then having the students actually evaluate facilitators based on the rubric.
Nice. So having a more student-friendly language facilitator rubric, that would be an interesting idea. And then give it to students to evaluate teachers. That would be very interesting. A final thought before we call it a day.
Anybody?
I think that you would have to think about, if you were going to use this as a rubric, it's no different than what we would expect for students or for facilitators to do with students. If they're not successful or partially successful or not highly successful yet, then what supports are in place for each one of these areas.
the next steps. Exactly.
Okay, so really being purposeful also in using the rubric to figure out what we're going to do next, right? If our teachers are in that not yet successful or partially successful mode, how do we move them forward into the successful and highly successful pieces of the rubric? So thank you for engaging with us this late in the afternoon. Hopefully you took some nice resources away from today. I guess we'll see you a little later at the reception. Good afternoon to all.
Thank you.